Ambassador Sarah Chun stood at the viewport of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching the massive structure of Galactic Station Prime grow larger as they approached. The station was a marvel of engineering, a sprawling metropolis in space that housed representatives from over 300 different species. Its crystalline spires caught the light of the nearby star, creating rainbow patterns that danced across its surface. "First time seeing the capital station, Ambassador?" asked Captain Rodriguez, the ship's commanding officer. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes that had seen their share of the galaxy's wonders and horrors. "Actually, no," Sarah replied, adjusting her formal diplomatic robes. "I was here 20 years ago as a junior attaché. It's grown considerably since then." What she didn't mention was why she was really here. The official record stated that Ambassador Chun was attending a routine diplomatic conference. The reality was far more complex. 3 weeks ago, intercepted communications had revealed that the Galactic Empire was planning something called Operation Cleansing. Intelligence suggested it was aimed at humanity, though the specifics remained unclear. Sarah had been chosen for this mission not just for her diplomatic skills, but for her unique background. Before joining the diplomatic corps, she had served in special forces for 15 years. She understood both the language of peace and the necessity of preparation for war. The Council of Earth had sent her with specific instructions: learn what the Empire was planning, and, if necessary, deliver a message that would make them reconsider their course of action. The docking procedures took nearly an hour. Galactic Station Prime was notorious for its bureaucracy, with forms required for everything from breathing the station air to walking in the corridors. Sarah endured it all with practiced patience, knowing that showing irritation would only make things more difficult. Her first stop was the human embassy, a modest structure tucked away in what the other species called the peripheral sector. It was diplomat speak for the areas where the lesser species were housed. Humanity had only been part of the Galactic Empire for 50 years, making them relative newcomers compared to civilizations that had been members for millennia. Ambassador Marcus Webb greeted her at the embassy entrance. He was a tall, thin man with graying hair and the perpetually worried expression of someone carrying heavy responsibilities. "Sarah, thank God you're here," he said, ushering her into his private office. The room was decorated with items from Earth: a small bonsai tree, photographs of mountains and oceans, and a United Nations flag. "The situation is worse than we thought." "How much worse?" Sarah asked, accepting the offered chair. Marcus activated a privacy field generator, a small device that would prevent any electronic surveillance from recording their conversation. "The Empire isn't just planning to restrict human expansion into new systems. They're planning complete subjugation. According to my sources, they view humanity as a potential threat that needs to be eliminated before we become too powerful." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Evidence." "Yesterday, I managed to get a copy of a classified Imperial document through unofficial channels." Marcus handed her a datapad. "It's all there. Operation Cleansing calls for the systematic destruction of human military capabilities, followed by the installation of Imperial governors on all human worlds. Any resistance will be met with orbital bombardment." Sarah read through the document, her expression growing darker with each paragraph. The Empire had clearly spent months planning this operation. They had detailed intelligence on human military installations, shipping routes, and even civilian population centers. What struck her most was the casual tone of the document. It discussed the potential deaths of billions of humans as if they were mere statistics. "When?" she asked. "The operation is scheduled to begin in 72 hours, Marcus replied. "The Imperial fleet is already moving into position around our border systems. They're calling it military exercises, but our long-range sensors tell a different story." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy corridors of the station. Aliens of dozens of different species went about their daily business, completely unaware that a genocide was being planned just a few levels above them in the Imperial Council chambers. "What about the other species?" she asked. "Surely some of them would object to this kind of action." Marcus shook his head grimly. Most of them see humanity as upstarts who expanded too quickly and asked too many uncomfortable questions. The Zentari are actively supporting the operation. They've never forgiven us for discovering their slave operations in the Outer Rim. The Kellian Consortium sees an opportunity to claim our trade routes. As for the others, he shrugged. They're either indifferent or too afraid of the Empire to speak up. Sarah turned back to face him. Then, we'll have to handle this ourselves. Sarah, you need to understand the scope of what we're facing, Marcus said urgently. The Imperial Navy has over 10,000 ships of the line. Humanity has maybe 300 vessels that could be called proper warships. Even with our technological advantages, we're outnumbered 30-1. This was true, and Sarah knew it. Humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy had been possible because of their technological innovation and adaptability, not because of military might. Human ships were often more advanced than their alien counterparts, but there were simply too few of them to make a difference in an all-out war. There's something else, Marcus continued. The Empire has been studying our military for years. They know our strengths and weaknesses. Operation Cleansing isn't just about overwhelming us with numbers. They've developed specific tactics to counter our advantages. Sarah absorbed this information silently. She had known the mission would be difficult, but the situation was even worse than Earth's intelligence services had suspected. However, she hadn't come here just to gather information. Marcus, I need you to arrange a meeting with the Imperial Council. His eyes widened. Sarah, that's impossible. The Council doesn't meet with junior species representatives except under very specific circumstances. And given what they're planning, then we'll have to create those circumstances, Sarah said firmly. How long does it typically take to request an emergency session? Emergency session? Marcus stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Sarah, what are you planning? I'm planning to give them a chance to reconsider, she replied. The Council values strength above all else, right? Well, they're about to discover that humanity has strengths they haven't considered. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of what she was suggesting. Finally, he spoke. Even if I could arrange a meeting, and that's a very big if, what makes you think they'll listen to anything you have to say? In their minds, the decision has already been made. Because I'm not just going to talk to them, Sarah said. I'm going to show them exactly what they're choosing to fight. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with Marcus to understand the political dynamics of the Imperial Council. The Empire was technically a democracy, with each member species having representation based on their military and economic contributions. In practice, it was controlled by a handful of powerful species who had dominated galactic politics for centuries. The hegemonic triumvirate, consisting of the Zilani, the Bordhack, and the Vex, controlled nearly 60% of the Council's votes. They were ancient civilizations with vast military forces and economic networks that spanned thousands of systems. To them, humanity represented a disruption to the established order. The Zilani are the real power behind this operation, Marcus explained as they reviewed intelligence files. They've been the dominant military force in the galaxy for over 2,000 years. Human innovations in ship design and combat tactics have made their own forces look obsolete by comparison. Sarah studied the holographic display showing the positions of various fleets. The Zilani had indeed positioned their forces strategically around human space, but there was something about their deployment that struck her as odd. They're spreading themselves too thin, she observed. Look at these formations. They're trying to encircle all of human space simultaneously. That kind of deployment works against a conventional enemy, but humans don't fight conventionally. Marcus finished her thought. Sarah, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. Marcus, how quickly can you give me that meeting with the Imperial Council? The next day, Ambassador Webb managed to secure an audience with the Council through a combination of formal diplomatic channels and calling in favors built up over years of service. The meeting was scheduled for that evening, just 18 hours before Operation Cleansing was set to begin. Sarah spent the afternoon in preparation, but not in the way most diplomats would. Instead of reviewing talking points and treaty law, she was in the embassy's communications center, sending coded messages to contacts throughout human space. To any observer, it would look like routine diplomatic correspondence. In reality, she was activating networks that had been dormant for years. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked as they prepared to leave for the council chambers. "Once you start down this path, there's no going back." "There was never any going back," Sarah replied, checking her formal robes one final time. "The Empire made their choice when they decided to plan genocide. Now, they get to live with the consequences of that choice." The council chambers were a massive amphitheater carved from a single piece of crystal. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in carefully arranged tiers, with the most powerful civilizations occupying the lower levels closer to the central speaking platform. Humanity's delegation was seated in the upper reaches, a physical reminder of their perceived status in the galactic hierarchy. Sarah walked down the long path to the central platform, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. She could sense the dismissive attitudes of most of the representatives. To them, she was just another human making a futile protest against the inevitable. High Counselor Vexkth of the Zalani called the session to order. The Zalani were imposing creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall with chitinous exoskeletons and multifaceted eyes that seemed to see everything. Vexkth's voice resonated through the chamber with natural authority. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Sarah Chun of the Human Federation," the High Counselor announced. "You have requested this emergency session. State your business." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect chamber. "Honored counselors, I come before you today to address a matter of grave importance to the stability and future of our galaxy. 3 days ago, classified Imperial documents revealed the existence of Operation Cleansing, a planned military action against human space scheduled to begin in less than 18 hours. A murmur ran through the chamber. Officially, Operation Cleansing was still secret, though most of the major powers knew of its existence. Sarah's public acknowledgement of it forced the issue into the open. These documents detail plans for the systematic destruction of human military forces, the occupation of human worlds, and the subjugation of human populations. The operation's stated goal is the elimination of humanity as an independent force in galactic affairs. Counselor Borthe Kinine of the Borthak Collective stood up from his position in the second tier. The Borthak were hive-minded insectoids who communicated through complex pheromone patterns translated into standard galactic. The human representative speaks of classified documents she should not possess. This alone demonstrates why Operation Cleansing has become necessary. Humanity consistently violates the established protocols of civilized space. "I'm not here to debate the legality of intelligence gathering," Sarah responded calmly. "I am here to inform this council that the planned genocide of humanity will not proceed as expected." The word genocide sent a shock through the chamber. In the Empire's sanitized language, Operation Cleansing was described as a corrective military action or a restoration of galactic stability. Sarah's blunt characterization forced the representatives to confront the reality of what they were sanctioning. High Counselor Vexkth's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "Human, you forget your place. This council does not negotiate with subjects. You will return to your worlds and prepare for integration into proper imperial governance. Continued resistance will only increase the suffering of your people." "That," Sarah said quietly, "is where you're wrong." She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, a standard galactic communicator, but one that had been heavily modified. "I would like to show the Council exactly what they have chosen to fight." Before anyone could object, Sarah activated the device. The chamber's main holographic display came to life, showing a real-time view of space near the Proxima Centauri system, one of humanity's major military installations. The display showed what appeared to be empty space, with only the distant glow of stars visible against the cosmic backdrop. Representatives began murmuring among themselves, confused about what they were supposed to be seeing. "I don't understand the purpose of this display," VexKTH said. "You show us empty space." "That's what you're supposed to see," Sarah replied. "Computer, initiate reveal protocol authorization, Chin-Alpha 7. Suddenly, the display changed dramatically. What had appeared to be empty space was revealed to be filled with ships, hundreds of them. Sleek human vessels materialized out of nowhere, their stealth systems disengaging in perfect synchronization. The ships had been hiding in plain sight, invisible to even the Empire's most advanced sensors. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. The Zilani military advisors were frantically checking their own sensor data, trying to understand how such a large fleet could have gone completely undetected. "What you are seeing," Sarah announced over the noise, "is the Terran Defense Force's third fleet. It consists of 423 vessels, including 18 of our newest Dreadnought-class ships. They have been positioned there for 6 weeks, completely invisible to Imperial surveillance." High Counselor VexKTH's compound eyes were fixed on the display. "Impossible. Our sensors would have detected any significant military buildup in human space." "Your sensors detected exactly what we wanted them to detect," Sarah said with a smile. "This is just one of 12 similar fleets that have been positioned throughout human space over the past 2 months. Each one has been waiting for this moment." The implications of what she was revealing began to sink in throughout the chamber. The Empire's intelligence estimates had been catastrophically wrong. Instead of facing a scattered and unprepared human defense, Operation Cleansing would be walking into a carefully prepared trap. "Computer, display tactical overview," Sarah commanded. The hologram shifted to show a wide view of human space. One by one, previously invisible fleet concentrations revealed themselves. The Empire's planned invasion routes were all covered by substantial human forces that had somehow managed to remain completely hidden. Counselor Borthay K9's chemical scent indicators showed extreme agitation. "This is irrelevant. Even if humanity has managed to concentrate more forces than expected, the Empire's numerical superiority remains decisive." Sarah's expression grew cold. "Counselor, you're thinking like someone fighting the last war. Let me show you how humanity fights this one." The display shifted again, this time showing archive footage from humanity's recent conflict with the Raider clans in the Outer Rim. The footage showed human ships engaging enemies using tactics the Empire had never seen before. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting, their damage control systems performing seeming miracles. Human vessels moved in ways that defied conventional tactical doctrine, coordinating their actions with a precision that bordered on telepathy. "This is combat footage from the Battle of Kepler Station," Sarah explained. "A single human cruiser group engaged and destroyed a Raider fleet 3 times its size. Notice how they fight, not as individual ships, but as a single coordinated organism. Every human crew member is connected through quantum-entangled communication systems. They share information, tactics, even sensory data in real time." The chamber watched in fascination and growing horror as the human ships demonstrated capabilities that seemed to border on the supernatural. They anticipated enemy movements before they happened, coordinated complex maneuvers across impossible distances, and showed a level of tactical innovation that turned every engagement into a masterclass in warfare. "But that's not even our most significant advantage," Sarah continued. "You see, the Empire has been studying humanity for years, learning our weaknesses and developing counters to our strengths. What the Empire failed to understand is that we've been studying you as well." A new set of data appeared on the display. Detailed schematics of Imperial ship designs, fleet formations, communication protocols, and even strategic doctrine. The information was comprehensive and clearly obtained through years of careful intelligence gathering. "We know the exact specifications of every ship class in the Imperial Navy. We know your standard tactical responses to every combat situation. We know the personal histories and psychological profiles of your senior commanders. Most importantly, we know about the fractures in your alliance. Sarah's statement caused immediate uproar in the chamber. Representatives from various species began looking suspiciously at each other, wondering what secrets might have been exposed. High Counselor Vekh called for order. Human, you speak of matters you cannot possibly understand. The Imperial Alliance has stood for millennia. Has it? Sarah asked. Computer, display the board hack trade dispute files. New information appeared on the screen, showing detailed records of secret negotiations between the board hack collective and several fringe species. The documents revealed that the board hack had been planning to use the chaos of Operation Cleansing to seize control of several systems claimed by their Zilani allies. Counselor Borth Kinine began emitting aggressive pheromone patterns. These documents are fabricated. The collective would never, computer, display the Zilani contingency plans, Sarah interrupted. More files appeared, these ones showing Zilani preparations for a potential board hack betrayal. The plans included provisions for the complete destruction of board hack breeding worlds in the event of treachery. The chamber descended into chaos as representatives realized that their most trusted allies had been preparing for war against each other, even while planning humanity's destruction. This is what happens when you base an alliance on fear and dominance rather than mutual respect, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise. You've built a coalition that's only held together by the existence of external threats. Remove those threats, and you begin to devour each other. But Sarah wasn't finished. Computer, display humanitarian protocols. The final set of documents that appeared on the screen were perhaps the most damning of all. They showed detailed Empire plans for dealing with civilian resistance during Operation Cleansing. The protocols authorized the use of biological weapons against human population centers and the establishment of forced labor camps for survivors. Ladies, gentlemen, and respected entities of all kinds, Sarah said formally, what you see before you is not a military operation. It is a planned genocide. The Empire intends to murder billions of human beings not because we pose a military threat, but because we represent a different way of thinking about galactic civilization. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the Empire's plans became clear. Even some of the species that had supported Operation Cleansing looked uncomfortable with the revealed details. But here's what I want you to understand, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. Humanity will not go quietly into extinction. We will fight. And when we fight, we don't fight to win battles or capture territory. We fight to ensure that our children have a future. That makes us more dangerous than any force you've ever faced. High Counselor Vekh attempted to regain control of the situation. Your threats are meaningless, human. Even with your hidden fleets and intelligence gathering, you cannot stand against the combined might of the Empire. Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it was not a diplomatic smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Counselor, you're absolutely right. Humanity cannot stand against the combined might of the Empire. She paused, letting the admission sink in, which is why we're not going to try. Before anyone could respond, Sarah activated another function on her device. Computer, initiate Operation Lighthouse. Throughout the chamber, every personal communication device belonging to the various representatives began receiving the same message simultaneously. It was a simple text transmission, but its contents sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. The message contained detailed evidence of corruption, illegal activities, and secret arrangements involving dozens of the Empire's member species. It revealed which species had been secretly dealing with the Raider clans. It exposed the Kellan Consortium's use of slave labor in their manufacturing facilities. It documented the Zilani military's systematic execution of prisoners during their last 3 campaigns. But, most importantly, it revealed the existence of a previously unknown organization called the Liberation Coalition, a network of oppressed species that had been secretly working to overthrow imperial rule for the past decade. The message included a complete roster of coalition members and their plans for coordinated uprisings across the galaxy. What you're seeing, Sarah announced as chaos erupted throughout the chamber, is the result of 50 years of careful preparation. While the Empire was watching our military forces and studying our technology, we were building relationships with every species that had ever been oppressed by Imperial rule. And it turns out there are quite a lot of them. The implications were staggering. The Liberation Coalition included over 70 different species from across the galaxy, many of them holding critical positions in Imperial infrastructure. If they acted simultaneously, they could cripple the Empire's ability to maintain control over its territory. Operation Cleansing has been scheduled to begin in 17 hours, Sarah continued. In 18 hours, the Liberation Coalition will begin Operation Freedom. Every Imperial facility in Coalition space will be captured or destroyed. Every Imperial fleet will find itself cut off from supply lines and surrounded by hostile forces. Every Imperial world will face internal rebellion supported by species that understand how to fight against overwhelming odds. High Counselor Vexka was frantically communicating with military advisors, trying to assess the scope of the threat Sarah had just revealed. "You're bluffing," he said finally. "Even if such a coalition exists, they would never risk their own survival for humanity." "They're not doing it for humanity," Sarah replied. "They're doing it for themselves. For their children, for the chance to build a galaxy where might doesn't always make right. Humanity just happened to be the catalyst that brought them together." The truth was even more complex than Sarah had revealed. Over the past 50 years, human diplomats and intelligence operatives had indeed been building networks throughout the galaxy. But it hadn't started as a military operation. It had begun as a genuine effort to understand and connect with the galaxy's diverse civilizations. Humans had a unique gift among galactic species, the ability to find common ground with almost anyone. Where other species saw only differences, humans saw potential for friendship, trade, and mutual benefit. This trait had made them natural intermediaries between species that had been enemies for centuries. The Liberation Coalition had grown organically from these relationships. Species that had felt isolated and oppressed by Imperial rule found hope in humanity's message that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. They began working together, sharing resources and information, and gradually building the infrastructure necessary for coordinated resistance. Sarah looked around the chamber, seeing the fear and uncertainty in the faces of the representatives. "I want to be absolutely clear about something. Humanity didn't create this situation. The Empire did. Every species in the Liberation Coalition joined because they were tired of being treated as subjects rather than equals. Operation Cleansing was simply the final proof that the Empire would never change." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final message. "In 17 hours, the Empire will launch an unprovoked attack against human space. In 18 hours, the galaxy will discover that the age of Imperial dominance is over. The choice before you now is simple. You can continue down the path of war and watch your empire tear itself apart, or you can choose a different future." Sarah deactivated her communication device and began walking toward the chamber exit. Behind her, the assembled representatives erupted into frantic discussions and emergency planning sessions. As she reached the chamber doors, High Counselor Vexka called after her. "Human, if you walk out of this chamber, there can be no negotiation. Operation Cleansing will proceed as planned." Sarah turned back one final time. "Counselor, the time for negotiation ended the moment your people decided that genocide was an acceptable solution to political problems. What happens next is entirely up to you." She walked out of the chamber, leaving behind an empire about to discover that it had chosen the wrong species to fight. Admiral Marcus Thorne stood on the bridge of the TDF Indomitable, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching Imperial fleet. The massive dreadnought was the flagship of humanity's second fleet, positioned near the Arcturus system, where the Empire expected to make their primary thrust into human space. What the Empire didn't know was that the Second Fleet had been reinforced with experimental technologies that would soon reshape their understanding of warfare. Admiral, we're receiving final positioning reports from all fleet elements, reported Commander Lisa Park, his chief of staff. The trap is set. Thorn nodded grimly. 3 hours had passed since Ambassador Chin's dramatic revelation to the Imperial Council. Instead of reconsidering their position, the Empire had accelerated Operation Cleansing, moving their timeline forward by 14 hours. Apparently, they believed that speed would prevent the Liberation Coalition from organizing their response. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. "Sir, incoming transmission from Terra Prime," announced Lieutenant Johnson from the communication station. "Put it through to my ready room," Thorn ordered. He needed to hear the latest intelligence updates before the shooting started. In his private quarters, Admiral Thorn activated the secured communication link. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Sarah Martinez, humanity's highest-ranking military officer, materialized before him. Her expression was grim but determined. "Marcus, I'll keep this brief," she began without preamble. "The Empire has committed over 6,000 ships to Operation Cleansing. They're hitting us simultaneously across 47 systems, expecting to overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers." "What's our actual force disposition?" Thorn asked. "Better than they think, but not as good as we'd like," Martinez replied. "We have roughly 800 ships in position across all theaters. The good news is that every one of them is equipped with the new quantum coordination systems and adaptive armor. The bad news is that we're still outnumbered 8-1. Thorn studied the strategic overview she was transmitting. The Empire's plan was actually quite sophisticated. They were attacking human space from multiple directions simultaneously, preventing humanity from concentrating their forces effectively. In a conventional war, it would have been a winning strategy. "What's the status of Operation Lighthouse?" he asked. Admiral Martinez smiled for the first time during their conversation. "The Liberation Coalition has exceeded all expectations. 73 species have confirmed their participation, and they control critical infrastructure throughout Imperial space. When they move, it's going to cause chaos on a scale the Empire has never experienced. And our new allies? The Kithara have committed their entire battle fleet to support us. The Mendari are already moving to secure jump points in the Outer Rim. Most importantly, the Ethereal Assembly has agreed to provide technological support." Thorn felt a chill at the mention of the Ethereals. They were one of the galaxy's oldest and most mysterious civilizations, ancient beings of pure energy who rarely involve themselves in the affairs of younger species. If they were willing to support humanity against the Empire, the situation was even more serious than he had realized. "Marcus, there's something else you need to know," Admiral Martinez continued. "Our intelligence network has confirmed that the Empire is planning to use biological weapons if their conventional assault fails. They have plague ships positioned throughout their fleet, ready to deploy if necessary." The casual mention of genocide-scale weapons no longer surprised Thorn. Over the past few days, humanity had learned that the Empire they had tried so hard to join was far more ruthless than anyone had imagined. The revelation had been sobering for a species that still believed diplomacy could solve most problems. "Understood, Admiral. What are our rules of engagement?" Martinez's expression hardened. "The Empire has made their intentions clear. They want to exterminate humanity as a species. Our response is authorized to match the threat level. No restraints, Marcus. We fight to win, and we fight to ensure that this never happens again." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Thorn alone with his thoughts. In his 40-year career, he had always fought with the goal of minimizing casualties and achieving political objectives with the least amount of violence necessary. Today would be different. Today, humanity was fighting for its very survival. Returning to the bridge, Thorn found his crew making final preparations for battle. The Indomitable was the most advanced ship in humanity's fleet, incorporating technologies that had been developed in secret over the past 20 years. Its quantum coordination systems allowed it to share targeting data tactical information, and even sensory input with every other ship in the fleet. Its adaptive armor could reconfigure itself in real time to counter specific weapon types. Most importantly, it carried humanity's newest and most devastating weapon, the entropic torpedo. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting the Imperial Vanguard, reported Commander Park. Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Signal all fleet elements to assume battle positions, Thorne ordered. And Commander, transmit the authentication codes to our friends. It's time they knew exactly who they're fighting alongside. Throughout human space, similar scenes were playing out as humanity's hidden fleets prepared for the Empire's assault. The Third Fleet under Admiral Kim was positioned near the Sol system itself, ready to defend humanity's birth world. The Fourth Fleet was covering the industrial worlds of the inner colonies. Smaller task forces were scattered across the frontier, ready to respond to Imperial attacks wherever they might come. But humanity wasn't fighting alone. In the outer regions of Imperial space, ships bearing the colors of dozens of different species were moving toward their assigned targets. The Liberation Coalition wasn't just providing moral support. They were launching their own coordinated offensive against Imperial infrastructure. On the bridge of the Kithara battleship Vengeance of Stars, Captain Zethkar reviewed the target assignments one final time. The Kithara were a proud warrior species that had been subjugated by the Empire 300 years ago. They had never forgotten the humiliation of defeat, and now they finally had a chance for revenge. Captain, we are approaching the Imperial Naval Depot at Zirian, reported his tactical officer. Defensive installations are minimal, as expected. Excellent, Zethkar replied. The Empire never expected anyone to strike at their logistics infrastructure. Today they learned the price of arrogance. The Zirian Depot was one of hundreds of similar facilities throughout Imperial space, responsible for maintaining and resupplying the Empire's vast military machine. It contained enough spare parts, ammunition, and fuel to keep an entire fleet operational for months. Its destruction would cripple Imperial operations throughout the sector. The Kithara fleet emerged from hyperspace with devastating precision. 12 heavy cruisers and 40 destroyers materialized around the depot, their weapons already charging. The surprised Imperial garrison managed to get off a few distress signals before being overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. Similar attacks were occurring throughout Imperial territory as the Liberation Coalition struck at carefully selected targets. Fuel depots exploded in brilliant fireballs. Communication relays went dark. Supply convoys vanished without a trace. Within the first hour of Operation Freedom, the Empire's ability to coordinate their military forces had been severely compromised. Back in human space, Admiral Thorne watched as the Imperial fleet approached his position. The enemy formation was impressive. 300 ships arranged in a classic hammer-an, anvil formation designed to overwhelm defensive positions through concentrated firepower. It was exactly the kind of assault that had worked for the Empire for centuries. "Sir, the Imperial fleet is hailing us," reported Lieutenant Johnson. "Put them through," Thorne ordered. The main screen filled with the image of an imposing Zalani officer wearing the insignia of a fleet admiral. His chitinous face was arranged in what humans had learned was the Zalani expression of supreme confidence. "Human vessels, this is Admiral Kethvar of the Imperial Third Fleet. By order of the Imperial Council, you will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in the destruction of your ships and the execution of your crews." Admiral Thorne stepped forward, his expression calm despite the threat. "Admiral Kethvar, this is Admiral Marcus Thorne of the Terran Defense Force. I have one response to your demands." He paused for effect before delivering his reply with quiet intensity. "Come and take them." The transmission ended, and both fleets prepared for battle. The Imperial ships began their attack run, confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority. What they didn't realize was that they were flying into the most sophisticated trap in military history. "All ships, initiate coordination protocol," Admiral Thorne commanded. Throughout the human fleet, quantum communication systems activated, linking every ship into a single tactical network. Suddenly, the 120 human vessels began moving with perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated by artificial intelligence systems that could process tactical information faster than any biological mind. The Imperial fleet opened fire first, sending thousands of energy bolts and missiles toward the human positions. The humans' response was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. Instead of returning fire immediately, the human ships began moving in complex patterns that seemed to defy tactical logic. Then, the Imperial weapon struck, and the true nature of humanity's new defenses became clear. The adaptive armor on the human ships analyzed each incoming attack and reconfigured itself to provide optimal protection. Energy weapons that should have penetrated hull plating harmlessly dissipated against specially tuned defensive fields. Missiles that should have destroyed entire ships detonated against armor that had been specifically adapted to counter their explosive force. Impossible, Admiral Kethvar muttered as he watched his first salvo fail to inflict significant damage. Their technology cannot be this advanced. His tactical officer was equally confused. Sir, our weapons appear to be significantly less effective than projected. The human ships are still maintaining full combat capability. What the Imperial fleet was witnessing was the result of decades of human innovation in defensive technology. The adaptive armor wasn't just a single system. It was a network of programmable matter that could reconfigure itself at the molecular level. When struck by an energy weapon, it created a specialized absorption matrix. When hit by kinetic projectiles, it formed impact dispersal patterns. Most importantly, it learned from each attack, becoming more effective against similar weapons. But the humans weren't content to simply survive the Imperial assault. As their defensive systems adapted to the enemy weapons, their own attack systems came online. What followed was a demonstration of tactical innovation that would be studied in military academies for generations. Instead of the expected return volley, the human fleet began deploying weapons that the Empire had never encountered. Quantum destabilizers created localized space-time distortions that tore Imperial ships apart at the subatomic level. Neural disruptors sent targeted electromagnetic pulses that overloaded alien nervous systems, leaving enemy crews unconscious while their ships drifted helplessly. Most devastating of all were the entropic torpedoes, weapons that accelerated the natural decay process of matter, causing enemy vessels to literally age decades in seconds. Sir, we've lost contact with the 4th and 7th battle groups, reported the Imperial tactical officer, his voice showing the first signs of panic. The human weapons, they're unlike anything in our databases. Admiral Kethvar watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled by an enemy that should have been overwhelmed within minutes. Human ships moved through his formations like deadly dancers, their movements perfectly coordinated to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure. Every time his ships adapted to human tactics, the humans changed their approach entirely. Order all ships to concentrate fire on their flagship, he commanded desperately. If we can destroy their command ship, their coordination should collapse. It was sound tactical thinking based on centuries of Imperial experience. Unfortunately for Admiral Kethvar, human military doctrine had evolved beyond the need for centralized command structures. When 50 Imperial ships focused their fire on the Indomitable, the human flagship's quantum coordination systems simply distributed command authority throughout the fleet. The attack succeeded in damaging Admiral Thorne's ship, but it had no effect on the human fleet's tactical performance. Worse, the concentrated attack had left the Imperial ships vulnerable to the human counterattack. 20 entropic torpedoes struck the Imperial formation, and 20 enemy ships began aging rapidly. Their hulls corroded, their weapons failed, and their crews died of old age in minutes rather than decades. Retreat, Admiral Kethvar ordered, his pride finally overcome by the reality of the situation. Signal the entire fleet to withdraw to the secondary rally point. But even retreat proved impossible. The human ships had been positioned to cut off all escape routes, and their superior speed and maneuverability allowed them to pursue fleeing enemies with devastating effect. Of the 300 ships that had begun the assault on human space, fewer than 50 managed to escape the system. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as humanity's hidden fleets engaged the Empire's assault forces. Near Sol, Admiral Kim's Third Fleet was demonstrating that human defensive systems could protect even civilian populations from Imperial attack. In the outer colonies, smaller human task forces were using guerrilla tactics to destroy Imperial supply lines while avoiding direct confrontation. But the most significant development was occurring in Imperial space itself, where the Liberation Coalition was proving that the Empire's control over its territory was far more fragile than anyone had realized. On the industrial world of Kalara Prime, the local Minari population had risen in coordinated rebellion against their Imperial overseers. The Minari were a reptilian species known for their patience and careful planning. They had spent years infiltrating key positions in the planet's manufacturing infrastructure, and when Operation Freedom began, they struck with devastating effectiveness. Within hours, every major factory on Kalara Prime had been sabotaged or captured. The planet's output of military equipment, which normally supplied 3 entire Imperial fleets, dropped to 0 overnight. Even more importantly, the Minari had seized control of the planet's communication facilities, preventing Imperial authorities from coordinating their response. Similar uprisings were occurring throughout Imperial territory. On the agricultural world of Greenfall, the Yithrak farmers who had been forced to provide food for Imperial military forces simply stopped working. On the mining planet of Caraxia, the Delaney workers who extracted rare metals for Imperial weapons systems destroyed their equipment and sealed the mine entrances. On the research station of Nexus 7, the enslaved Quellan scientists who had been forced to develop new technologies for the Empire erased their databases and released experimental viruses that made their facilities unusable. The cumulative effect was catastrophic for the Imperial war machine. Within 12 hours of the operation's start, the Empire had lost control of over 200 worlds and installations. Their ability to resupply their military forces had been reduced by 60%. Most critically, their communication networks had been so thoroughly compromised that many Imperial commanders didn't even know their supply lines had been cut. High Counselor Vekthich stood in the Imperial Command Center, watching in disbelief as report after report of disaster reached his staff. The massive holographic display that normally showed the Empire's territorial control was now filled with red indicators representing lost systems, failed communications, and destroyed installations. How is this possible? He demanded of his military advisors. How could the humans coordinate such an extensive operation without our intelligence services detecting it? General Thrackmore of the Borthat Collective buzzed his wings nervously before responding. High Counselor, our analysis suggests that the humans didn't coordinate this operation in any conventional sense. They appear to have created a decentralized network of relationships with oppressed species throughout our territory. When a signal was given, these species acted independently, but toward the same goal. It was a type of organization that the Empire's hierarchical mindset couldn't easily comprehend. Instead of a traditional command structure, humanity had created what they called a resilient network, a system where individual nodes could operate independently while still contributing to the overall objective. It was simultaneously more flexible and more robust than anything the Empire had encountered. What about our assault fleets? Vexkth asked. Surely they've achieved their objectives against human space? The silence that greeted his question was answer enough. Slowly, reluctantly, the reports began coming in. The Third Fleet had been destroyed at Arcturus. The Seventh Fleet had lost 70% of its ships near the Sol system. The 12th Fleet had been forced to retreat after encountering human defensive systems that made their weapons useless. Across every front, the story was the same. Imperial forces had expected to face desperate human defenders using outdated equipment and conventional tactics. Instead, they had encountered an enemy that fought with technologies and strategies they didn't understand, supported by allies they didn't know existed. High Counselor, interrupted Communications Director Velthara, we're receiving an incoming transmission from the human ambassador on Galactic Station Prime. VexKTH's mandibles clicked in fury. I have no intention of negotiating with terrorists and rebels. Sir, she's not requesting negotiations, Velthara replied nervously. She's offering terms for our surrender. The words hit the command center like a physical blow. For the first time in their civilization's history, the Zilani were being offered terms of surrender by a species they had considered inferior. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the military losses. Put her through, VexKTH commanded, his voice tight with controlled rage. Ambassador Chen's image appeared on the main screen. She was still on Galactic Station Prime, still wearing her diplomatic robes, but there was something different about her expression. Where before there had been careful diplomacy, now there was quiet confidence. High Counselor, she began formally, I trust you've been receiving reports about the current military situation. Your terrorist allies may have achieved some temporary successes, VexKTH replied, but the Empire has survived challenges before. We will adapt and overcome. Sarah smiled sadly. High Counselor, I don't think you understand the scope of what's happening. This isn't a rebellion that you can crush with military force. This is the death of the Imperial system itself. Before he could respond, she activated her communication device again. New information began appearing on screens throughout the Imperial Command Center. Real-time footage from dozens of worlds throughout Imperial space. The images showed celebrations. On world after world, species that had been oppressed for centuries were declaring their independence from Imperial rule. They weren't just rebelling against their overseers. They were establishing new governments, signing mutual defense treaties with each other, and creating the foundations of a completely different galactic civilization. What you're seeing, Sarah explained, is the birth of the Free Galaxy Coalition. 87 species have already joined, with more declaring their independence every hour. They're not seeking to conquer the Empire. They're seeking to replace it with something better. The scope of what she was describing was staggering. It wasn't just a military defeat. It was the complete collapse of the political order that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. And before you consider using your remaining military forces to restore control, Sarah continued, I should mention that the Ethereal Assembly has formally recognized the Free Galaxy Coalition as the legitimate government of former Imperial territory. Any attempt to suppress the liberation movements will be met with direct ethereal intervention. VexKTH felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The Ethereals were the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilization. Their technology was so advanced that it might as well have been magic, and their military capabilities were legendary. If they supported the coalition, the Empire's chances of survival were essentially zero. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I want you to understand that this didn't have to happen, Sarah replied. Humanity tried to join the Empire peacefully. We followed your laws, respected your customs, and contributed to galactic civilization. Operation Cleansing was your choice, not ours. She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle before continuing. However, the Free Galaxy Coalition is not interested in revenge. We're offering all former Imperial worlds the chance to join as equal members. That includes the core worlds of the Triumvirate. You can choose to be part of the galaxy based on cooperation and mutual respect, or you can choose to remain isolated and irrelevant. The offer was more generous than anything VexKTH had expected, but it also represented the complete end of everything his civilization had built. The Zilani had ruled the galaxy for 2,000 years. The idea of becoming just another member species in someone else's coalition was almost incomprehensible. And if we refuse, he asked. Sarah's expression grew cold. Then, you'll discover that humanity has learned more than just military technology from our time in the galaxy. We've learned how to build sustainable civilizations. The Free Galaxy Coalition will prosper and grow while the remnants of the Empire will stagnate and decline. Eventually, you'll either join us voluntarily or become irrelevant." The transmission ended, leaving the Imperial Command Center in stunned silence. In less than 24 hours, the entire galactic order had been turned upside down. The empire that had seemed invincible that morning was now facing extinction. High Counselor Vexkth looked around at his staff, seeing the same defeat and confusion in their faces that he felt in his own hearts. They had started a war expecting easy victory, and instead had awakened a force that they were powerless to stop. The age of the Galactic Empire was ending. The age of the Free Galaxy Coalition had begun, and at the center of it all, humanity, the young species that had been dismissed as insignificant, had proven that sometimes the greatest weapon in the galaxy was the ability to make friends. 6 months after the end of the Empire War, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in the newly constructed Assembly Hall of the Free Galaxy Coalition, watching as representatives from over 100 species took their seats for the first official session of the Galactic Council. The building itself was a testament to the new order. Instead of the imposing crystal spires that had dominated Imperial architecture, the Coalition had chosen to construct their capital from living coral, genetically modified by the aquatic thalassins to grow in specific patterns that created beautiful and functional spaces. "Nervous?" asked Marcus Webb, who had been appointed as humanity's senior representative to the new government. Sarah smiled. "Excited mostly. After everything we've been through, it's remarkable to see how far we've come." The transformation of galactic civilization had been swift and dramatic. Within weeks of the Empire's collapse, over 200 species had declared their independence and begun forming new alliances based on mutual cooperation rather than domination. The process hadn't been entirely smooth. There had been territorial disputes, trade conflicts, and occasional military skirmishes, but the overall trend had been toward increased freedom and prosperity. The most surprising development had been the enthusiastic participation of many former Imperial core worlds. The Board Hat Collective had been among the first to petition for coalition membership, bringing with them advanced manufacturing technologies that had accelerated reconstruction efforts throughout former Imperial space. Even some Zilani worlds had eventually chosen to join, though High Counselor Vexkth himself had withdrawn to a remote system and refused all contact with the new government. "The ethereal delegation has arrived," Marcus noted, gesturing toward a section of the Assembly Hall where several pillars of pure energy had taken their positions. Sarah felt a familiar sense of awe at the sight of the ethereals. Even after working with them for months, she still found it difficult to comprehend beings who had transcended physical existence millennia ago. Their decision to actively support the Free Galaxy Coalition had been the single most important factor in its rapid success. "Ambassador Chun," came a voice that seemed to speak directly to her mind rather than her ears. She turned to see luminous, thoughtful analysis, the ethereal entity she had worked most closely with during the transition period. "Luminous," she replied, using the shortened form of address the being preferred. "Is everything prepared for today's session?" "The technical infrastructure is functioning optimally," the ethereal responded. "However, I sense underlying tensions that may complicate the proceedings. The question of Imperial remnants remains unresolved, and several coalition members continue to harbor concerns about humanity's influence within the new government." This was true, and Sarah had expected it. The rapid collapse of the Empire had left power vacuums throughout the galaxy, and not everyone was comfortable with the extent to which humanity had shaped the coalition's founding principles. Some species worried that they had simply traded one dominant power for another, while others resented humanity's role in dismantling their traditional way of life. The Caraxian delegation has been particularly vocal about their concerns, Marcus added. They're questioning why humanity gets to represent such a large portion of the Coalition's membership, given that we're still one of the newer galactic species. Sarah understood their position. Humanity represented not just Earth and its colonies, but also the dozens of species that had formed close alliances with human governments during the liberation struggle. From the outside, It could look like humanity was building its own empire under the guise of democratic cooperation. That's exactly the kind of perception we need to address today, Sarah said. The whole point of the coalition is to prove that cooperation works better than domination. If other species think we're just replacing the empire with human hegemony, we've failed before we've even started. The opening ceremony began with a moment of silence for the billions who had died during the empire's millennia of rule, followed by presentations from each of the major founding species. Sarah listened carefully to each speech, noting the underlying themes and concerns that would shape the coalition's future. The Kithara spoke about the importance of maintaining strong defenses against potential threats. The Mindari emphasized the need for fair trade relationships that didn't favor any single species. The Thalassans advocated for environmental protection standards that would preserve the galaxy's diverse ecosystems. Each presentation reflected the specific experiences and priorities of its species, but they all shared common themes of freedom, equality, and mutual respect. When humanity's turn came, Sarah approached the central speaking platform with careful deliberation. She had spent weeks preparing this speech, knowing that it might determine whether the coalition succeeded in its ambitious goals or fractured into competing factions. Fellow sentients, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect hall. 6 months ago, our species fought the deadliest war in galactic history. Today, we gather not as victors and vanquished, but as equals seeking to build a better future for all our children. She paused, looking around at the diverse assembly of beings that represented the galaxy's incredible biological and cultural diversity. Humanity has been accused of seeking to replace the Empire's dominance with our own. I want to address that concern directly, because it goes to the heart of what the Free Galaxy Coalition represents. Sarah activated a holographic display that showed the current military disposition throughout Coalition space. These are the combined defense forces of the Free Galaxy Coalition. As you can see, humanity contributes approximately 15% of the total fleet strength. The Kithara contribute 18%. The Ethereals provide 22%. No single species dominates our military capabilities. A new display showed trade relationships within the coalition. Our economic data tells a similar story. Human worlds account for about 12% of the coalition's total economic output. We're significant contributors, but we're not dominant. The Thalassan aquaculture systems, Borthack manufacturing networks, and Mindari agricultural complexes each contribute more to our collective prosperity than any human economic sector. But Sarah knew that raw numbers weren't enough to address the underlying concerns. However, I understand that influence isn't just about military strength or economic power. It's about ideas, relationships, and the ability to shape the direction of our civilization. She took a deep breath before continuing. Humanity has indeed played a central role in creating the coalition's governing principles. We help design the democratic systems that give every species equal representation. We advocated for the economic policies that ensure fair trade relationships. We push for the military doctrines that prioritize defense over aggression. But here's what I want you to understand. We didn't do this because we thought our way was inherently superior. We did it because we learned from the mistakes of every other galactic civilization, including our own. Sarah activated another display, this one showing Earth's turbulent history. For most of human history, we were just as prone to conquest and domination as any other species. We built empires, enslaved our neighbors, and fought devastating wars over resources and territory. We almost destroyed our own homeworld multiple times through conflict and environmental destruction. Images flashed across the display showing humanity's darkest moments: world wars, ecological disasters, and social upheavals that had nearly ended their civilization. We learned to cooperate not because we were naturally peaceful, but because we had to. Our survival as a species depended on finding ways to resolve conflicts without destroying ourselves. When we finally reached the stars, we brought those hard-learned lessons with us. Sarah's expression grew more serious. The Empire never learned those lessons because they never had to. They achieved dominance early in their development and maintained it through force for thousands of years. They never experienced the existential threat that forces a species to evolve beyond conquest and domination. She gestured toward the ethereal section of the assembly. The ethereals transcended physical existence partly because they faced similar challenges in their early development. The Kithara developed their warrior codes because they had to learn how to channel aggressive instincts constructively. Every successful galactic civilization has found ways to move beyond pure competition toward cooperation. The question before us today isn't whether humanity should lead the coalition. The question is whether any single species should lead it. And our answer to that question is absolutely not. Sarah activated one final display, this one showing the proposed governmental structure for the coalition's permanent institutions. What we're proposing today is a truly democratic system where decisions are made by consensus, resources are shared equitably, and every species has the right to pursue its own destiny within the framework of mutual cooperation. The structure she displayed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of a hierarchical empire with a single dominant species, the coalition would be governed by a rotating council where leadership responsibilities shifted between different species based on expertise and circumstance. Military decisions would be made by species with the most relevant experience. Economic policies would be developed by those with the strongest understanding of trade and finance. Environmental regulations would be crafted by species with the deepest knowledge of ecological systems. But, Sarah continued, we also propose something that might be even more radical than democratic governance. We propose that the coalition should actively work to ensure its own eventual obsolescence. A murmur of confusion ran through the assembly. The concept of a government working to eliminate itself was so foreign that many species struggled to understand what she meant. The goal of the Free Galaxy Coalition shouldn't be to create a permanent institution that governs the galaxy forever, Sarah explained. It should be to create conditions where formal government becomes unnecessary. We should work toward a future where species cooperate naturally because it serves their mutual interests, not because they're required to by law or treaty. She paused, letting the revolutionary nature of her proposal sink in. We envision a galaxy where conflicts are resolved through negotiation because species understand that cooperation produces better outcomes than conflict. Where resources are shared willingly because everyone recognizes that prosperity is more sustainable when it's inclusive. Where diversity is celebrated because everyone understands that different perspectives make civilization stronger. The concept she was describing was so ambitious that it bordered on utopian, but Sarah had learned that sometimes the most important goals were those that seemed impossible. This is humanity's gift to the galaxy, she concluded. Not our technology, not our military capabilities, not our economic systems. Our gift is the dream of a civilization that no longer needs to be held together by force, but is held together by choice. Sarah returned to her seat amid respectful silence. Her proposal had been so unexpected that most of the delegates needed time to process its implications. The first to respond was Speaker Zethkar of the Kithara delegation. The scarred warrior stood slowly, his forearms gesturing in the patterns of formal debate. The human ambassador speaks of noble ideals, he began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of military tradition. But she underestimates the persistent nature of conflict in sentient societies. There will always be species that choose aggression over cooperation. There will always be those who believe they can benefit by taking from others rather than building for themselves. His words carried obvious truth, and Sarah could see several delegates nodding in agreement. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with species that had evolved as predators and civilizations that had built their entire cultures around conquest. How does the coalition defend itself against such threats without becoming the very thing it seeks to replace? Zethkar asked. It was exactly the question Sarah had expected, and she had spent considerable time developing an answer. She stood again, accepting the implicit invitation to continue the debate. Speaker Zethkar raises the fundamental challenge facing any peaceful civilization, she acknowledged. How do you maintain the ability to defend yourself without becoming militaristic? How do you prepare for conflict without creating a culture that glorifies violence? Sarah activated her communication device, calling up data from the Coalition's recent military operations. Over the past 6 months, the Coalition has faced 17 separate conflicts with Imperial remnants, raider groups, and aggressive species from outside our borders. In each case, we've successfully defended our territory and civilian populations. But we've done it without conquering our enemies' homeworlds or imposing our government on their people. The data showed something remarkable. In every conflict, Coalition forces had focused exclusively on defensive objectives. They had destroyed attacking fleets, captured raiding bases, and neutralized military threats. But they had never pursued retreating enemies beyond Coalition space, never demanded territorial concessions, and never attempted to force political changes on their adversaries. The difference, Sarah explained, is that we fight to protect, not to conquer. Our military doctrine is based on the principle that everyone has the right to govern themselves, even if we disagree with their choices. We will defend ourselves and our allies against aggression, but we will never use military force to impose our values on others. High Counselor Borthik K7 of the Reformed Collective raised his wings in a gesture requesting attention. This approach assumes that aggressive species will eventually learn to cooperate when they realize that aggression doesn't serve their interests. But what if they never learn? What if their culture is so fundamentally based on conquest that they cannot change? It was a darker question, one that touched on the possibility that some species might be inherently incompatible with peaceful civilization. Sarah had grappled with this issue extensively, knowing that the Coalition's idealistic principles might not survive contact with truly irredeemable enemies. High Counselor Borthik K7, that's perhaps the most difficult question facing any civilization that values both peace and freedom, she replied. Our current answer is that we will contain such species within their own territory and defend ourselves against their aggression, but we will never stop trying to find peaceful solutions to conflicts. And if peaceful solutions prove impossible, Sarah's expression grew solemn. Then we will do what we must to protect innocent lives, but we will do it with full recognition that violence always comes at a moral cost. We will never allow necessity to become an excuse for cruelty, and we will never stop working toward a future where such choices aren't necessary. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species raising questions about everything from economic policy to environmental protection to the rights of artificial intelligences. Each question revealed the complexity of building a truly inclusive galactic civilization, but also demonstrated the remarkable progress that had already been made. As the session drew to a close, Luminous Thoughtful Analysis requested permission to address the assembly. The Ethereal's words carried special weight because of their species' ancient wisdom and their role in supporting the Coalition's formation. Fellow sentients, the being communicated, the Ethereal Assembly has observed the rise and fall of galactic civilizations for over 50,000 years. We have seen countless attempts to create lasting peace through conquest, through isolation, through technological dominance, and through forced unity. All have ultimately failed. The chamber fell silent as the Ethereals shared their vast historical perspective. What makes the Free Galaxy Coalition unique is not its military strength, economic power, or even its democratic institutions. What makes it unique is its recognition that sustainable civilization requires continuous evolution toward greater cooperation and understanding. The Ethereal's presence seemed to intensify, filling the chamber with a sense of ancient wisdom. The path you have chosen is difficult and uncertain. There will be setbacks, failures, and moments when the ideals you've articulated today seem impossible to achieve. But for the first time in our long observation of galactic civilization, we believe there is genuine hope for transcending the cycle of rise and fall that has characterized previous attempts at galactic unity. The ethereal assembly pledges our continued support, not because we believe the coalition will achieve perfection, but because we believe it represents the best hope for learning from the mistakes of the past and building something better for the future. As the session concluded, delegates began the complex process of translating their discussions into specific policies and institutions. The work ahead would be challenging, building a truly democratic galactic government while respecting the sovereignty of individual species, creating economic systems that ensured fair distribution of resources while encouraging innovation and growth, maintaining military capabilities sufficient to defend against external threats while avoiding the militaristic mindset that had characterized previous galactic powers. But as Sarah walked through the corridors of the assembly hall, listening to the excited conversations between representatives from dozens of different species, she felt genuinely optimistic about the future for the first time in months. In one conversation corner, Thalassan engineers were discussing sustainable habitat design with Borthack industrial specialists. Near the main entrance, Kithra military advisors were sharing defensive strategies with Mendari intelligence officers. Throughout the building, species that had been enemies for centuries were working together to solve common problems. "Sarah," called Marcus as he caught up with her, "there's someone who wants to meet you." He gestured toward a small group near the diplomatic quarters, where Sarah saw a figure she recognized from intelligence briefings, but had never met in person. It was Ambassador Kelthara of the Zentari Trade Federation, one of the few major imperial allies that had not yet joined the coalition. The Zentari were a complex species, highly intelligent traders who had built their civilization around commerce and information exchange. They had supported the Empire not out of loyalty, but because imperial dominance had created stable conditions for trade. With the Empire's collapse, they found themselves in an uncertain position. "Ambassador Chun," Kelthara said formally, extending one of her four arms in the traditional Zentari greeting. "I bring greetings from the Zentari Trade Council and a proposition that may interest the coalition." "Ambassador Kelthara," Sarah replied, returning the greeting with practiced precision. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. What proposition does the Trade Council have in mind?" Kelthara's large, multifaceted eyes sparkled with what Sarah had learned was the Zentari expression of excitement about potential profit. "The Council has been observing the Coalition's development with great interest. Your democratic institutions have created remarkable stability in former imperial space, and your cooperative economic policies have generated impressive prosperity." She paused, clearly building towards something significant. "The Trade Council would like to propose a formal partnership agreement. Not full membership in the coalition. We prefer to maintain our political independence, but a comprehensive trade and mutual defense arrangement that would benefit all parties." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. The Zentari controlled some of the most important trade routes in the galaxy, and their information networks were unparalleled. A formal alliance with them would significantly strengthen the coalition's position and provide access to resources and knowledge that would accelerate their development. But she also understood that this offer represented something much more significant than a simple trade agreement. The Zentari were pragmatists who aligned themselves with whoever offered the best opportunities. Their decision to approach the coalition was a clear signal that they viewed it as the galaxy's rising power. "I think the Council would be very interested in such a proposal," Sarah replied carefully. "When would the Trade Council like to begin formal negotiations?" "Immediately, if possible," Kelthara responded. "The galaxy is changing rapidly, and the Council believes that early partnerships with successful new institutions provide the greatest mutual benefit." As they made arrangements for preliminary negotiations, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her dramatic confrontation with the Imperial Council. 6 months ago, humanity had been facing extinction. Today, they were helping to lead a galactic alliance that represented the hopes and dreams of hundreds of species. The transformation hadn't been without cost. The war had killed millions, displaced entire populations, and destroyed infrastructure that had taken centuries to build. The political upheaval had created chaos in many systems, and the process of building new institutions was proving complex and contentious. But for all its challenges, the new galaxy that was emerging from the Empire's ashes offered something that the old order never had: genuine hope for a future based on cooperation rather than domination. Later that evening, Sarah found herself standing alone on one of the assembly hall's observation decks, looking out at the stars that had once been dominated by a single empire, but now sparkled with the light of dozens of free civilizations. The view was spectacular. Ships from hundreds of different species moved through the traffic lanes around the Coalition's capital world, their diverse designs creating a complex but beautiful pattern against the backdrop of space. "Magnificent, isn't it?" came a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Admiral Thorne approaching, still wearing the uniform of the Terran Defense Force, but now bearing the additional insignia of the Coalition's Joint Military Command. "It really is," she agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." Thorne joined her at the observation deck's railing, looking out at the bustling traffic of the new galactic civilization. "When I was fighting that battle at Arcturus, I thought we were just trying to survive long enough to make the Empire reconsider. I never imagined we were actually fighting to birth an entirely new kind of galactic civilization." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The funny thing is, none of this would have been possible if the Empire hadn't forced our hand. Their attempt to destroy us created the exact conditions that made the Coalition possible." It was true. The Empire's aggression had united species that had never cooperated before, forced the development of new technologies and tactics, and, most importantly, demonstrated that alternative forms of galactic organization were not only possible, but necessary. "Do you think it will last?" Thorne asked. "The Coalition, I mean. Do you think we've actually created something that can survive the kinds of challenges that destroyed every previous attempt at galactic unity?" Sarah considered the question carefully. It was one that kept her awake many nights, knowing that the dreams and hopes of billions depended on the answer. "I think we've created something that has a chance," she replied finally. "Whether it succeeds will depend on whether we can continue to evolve and adapt as new challenges emerge. The Empire failed because it became rigid and unable to change. The Coalition's great advantage is that it's designed to transform itself continuously." She gestured toward the diverse collection of ships visible from their vantage point. "Look at that traffic pattern. 6 months ago, most of those species had never cooperated on anything more complex than basic trade relationships. Today, they're working together on projects that benefit everyone. That's not the result of laws or treaties. It's the result of people discovering that cooperation produces better outcomes than competition. And if they stop discovering that," Thorne asked. Sarah smiled. "Then we'll figure out new ways to make cooperation more attractive than conflict. That's what humans do. We adapt, we innovate, and we find solutions to problems that seem impossible." As if to emphasize her point, a new ship appeared in the traffic pattern, a vessel unlike any either of them had seen before. Its design incorporated elements from at least 6 different species' technologies, creating something entirely new and uniquely beautiful. "That's a joint research vessel," Thorne observed, checking his personal scanner. "Crew includes ethereals, Kythera, humans, thalassans, and 3 species I don't recognize. They're heading out to explore the galactic edge, looking for new civilizations that might want to join the Coalition." Sarah felt a surge of pride and hope. The ship represented everything the Coalition was trying to achieve: diverse beings working together toward common goals, exploring new frontiers not to conquer them, but to invite others to join their growing community. "That's our answer," she said finally. "As long as we keep growing, keep exploring, keep finding new ways to include more beings in our civilization, we'll stay ahead of the forces that destroyed previous galactic powers. The moment we stop growing is the moment we start dying. As she spoke, more ships appeared in the traffic pattern, each representing species and alliances that had been impossible just months before. The galaxy was changing faster than anyone had anticipated, driven by the simple but revolutionary idea that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. Sarah Chun, the diplomat who had started a revolution by refusing to accept genocide as inevitable, looked out at the stars and saw a future filled with infinite possibility. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, conflicts, and moments when the coalition's ideals would be tested by harsh realities. But for the first time in galactic history, an entire civilization was committed to learning from its mistakes and building something better. The age of empires was ending. The age of cooperation had begun. And at its heart, a species that had learned to turn their greatest weakness, their need for others, into their greatest strength was helping to guide the galaxy toward a future that previous generations had only dared to dream about. The stars themselves seemed brighter that night, illuminated not just by fusion fires, but by the hope of billions of beings who had chosen to work together rather than fight alone. It was, Sarah reflected, the most human thing imaginable, taking an impossible dream and finding a way to make it real.